The most transformative moment occurs when Clara discovers Edward's journal, revealing his deep regret and love for the daughter he never knew. Reading his heartfelt words, she finds closure and strength to embrace her newfound identity. This emotional turning point bridges the gap between past pain and future purpose, uniting her with Edward's legacy. The scene opens in an opulent lawyer's office, a space reflecting the immense wealth of the late Edward Marshall. The room is furnished with dark mahogany panels, a sprawling Persian rug, and bookshelves that appear more decorative than functional. Sunlight streams in through tall, arched windows, casting a warm yet solemn glow over the gathering. Every seat is occupied by members of the Marshall family, their faces a mix of anticipation, anxiety, and concealed disdain. At the head of the room sits Mr. Hargrove, Edward's trusted lawyer for decades, a man with a stern, unreadable demeanor. Before him rests a thick stack of documents. Edward's will, a document that would dictate the future of one of the most influential families in the city. As the clock chimes the hour, Mr. Hargrove clears his throat, silencing the murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen," he begins, his voice crisp and authoritative, "thank you for gathering here today. As you all know, the purpose of this meeting is to execute the final wishes of Edward Marshall. He was not only a man of great wealth, but also a man of clear intentions. Let us proceed without delay." The camera pans to capture the array of faces in the room. Victoria Marshall, Edward's eldest daughter, an ambitious CEO who already controls a significant portion of the family business. Her sharp suit and cold gaze project authority, but her fingers tapping impatiently on the armrest betray her inner tension. Robert Marshall, the middle child, a man whose passion for extravagant living has often led to whispers about financial irresponsibility. His tailored blazer barely conceals his smug confidence, as though he's already spent the inheritance in his mind. Sophia Marshall, the youngest, an artist and philanthropist who is long distanced herself from the corporate world. Her calm demeanor contrasts sharply with her siblings, though her tightly clasped hands suggest she isn't entirely immune to the weight of the moment. There are others, distant cousins, in-laws, and loyal family employees, all seated with varying levels of decorum and curiosity. As Mr. Hargrove reads the preliminary clauses, dividing minor assets and properties among extended family members, the main heirs exchange knowing glances. They are waiting for the big reveal, the division of the empire. Finally, the moment arrives. Mr. Hargrove pauses, adjusts his glasses, and flips to a marked page. The room holds its collective breath. "To my children," he reads, "Victoria, Robert, and Sophia, I leave equal shares of the Marshall Corporation, ensuring its legacy remains a family endeavor." Victoria's lips curl into a satisfied smirk. Robert leans back in his chair with a self-assured nod, and Sophia exhales softly, her expression unreadable. "And now," Mr. Hargrove continues, his tone shifting subtly, "we come to the matter of my liquid assets and personal fortune." The heirs sit up straighter, their attention laser-focused. While a portion has been allocated for charitable causes, a significant sum, amounting to 40% of my estate, is hereby bequeathed to Clara Harper. A gasp ripples through the room. Heads turn, whispers erupt, and the carefully curated facades begin to crack. "Who?" Robert blurts out, his voice cutting through the murmur. "Clara Harper?" Victoria repeats, her tone a mix of incredulity and disdain. "Who on earth is that?" Even Sophia's calm veneer falters as she frowns in confusion. Mr. Hargrove raises a hand for silence, his professional composure unwavering. "It is my duty to inform you that Clara Harper was a personal acquaintance of Mr. Marshall. Beyond this, I am not at liberty to disclose details that were not explicitly stated in the will." The room descends into chaos. Victoria demands answers, Robert hurls accusations, and distant relatives whisper furiously among themselves, speculating about Clara's identity. Is she a secret lover? An illegitimate child? A manipulative outsider who preyed on Edward in his final days? Sophia, who has remained quiet throughout the commotion, finally speaks up. Her voice is calm, but tinged with suspicion. Mr. Hargrove, does Clara Harper know about her inheritance? She does not, Mr. Hargrove replies, his tone measured. However, she will be contacted in due course as per Mr. Marshall's instructions. As the meeting concludes, the Marshall family disperses, but the air remains thick with tension. Victoria corners Mr. Hargrove, demanding more information. This woman must have manipulated him, she insists. It's the only explanation. I assure you, Ms. Marshall, Mr. Hargrove replies coolly, your father was of sound mind when he made these arrangements. Robert, meanwhile, pulls Sophia aside. Don't tell me you're okay with this, he says, his voice low but insistent. 40%, Sophia. That's nearly half the estate. Sophia meets his gaze evenly. I'm not okay with it, she admits. But I'm not jumping to conclusions either. We don't know who she is or what their relationship was. Robert scoffs. I'll tell you who she is. A gold digger who saw an opportunity and took it. The narrative shifts briefly to a small, modest home in a quiet town miles away from the Marshall estate. Clara Harper, a woman in her early 30s, is seen going about her day, oblivious to the storm brewing around her. She is depicted as kind and unassuming, her life a stark contrast to the wealth and grandeur of the Marshall family. She works as a schoolteacher, her days filled with lesson plans and children's laughter. Her connection to Edward Marshall remains a mystery, but her genuine nature hints at a deeper story yet to be uncovered. Back at the Marshall estate, Victoria begins planning a legal challenge, determined to invalidate the clause. Robert, true to form, hires a private investigator to dig into Clara's background, hoping to find dirt that could discredit her. Sophia, torn between loyalty to her family and a desire for truth, resolves to uncover Clara's story herself. The stage is set for a battle not just over wealth, but over Edward Marshall's legacy and the secrets he took to his grave. As the first segment concludes, the camera lingers on a family portrait hanging in the lawyer's office. Edward's face, stern yet compassionate, seems to watch over the room as though he anticipated the turmoil his will would unleash. The screen fades to black, and the audience is left with a singular question. Who is Clara Harper, and why did Edward Marshall entrust her with such a significant piece of his fortune? The scene resumes in the aftermath of the shocking revelation. The once stately lawyer's office now resembles a battleground. Voices overlap, tempers flare, and the elegant surroundings are a stark contrast to the chaos unraveling within. Victoria stands, her presence commanding as always, but her composure is unraveling. This is preposterous, she exclaims, pacing the room. Whoever this Clara Harper is, she has no right to what belongs to us. Robert, always quick to fuel the fire, leans forward in his chair, his tone dripping with venom. Mark my words, she's either some gold-digging scam artist or, he pauses dramatically, mistress our dear father kept hidden. Either way, she won't get a penny. Sophia, seated at the far end of the room, speaks up, her voice cutting through the noise. Can we stop with the assumptions for a moment? We don't know anything about her. Jumping to conclusions isn't going to help. Her words are met with a derisive laugh from Robert. Of course, you defend her. You always were the bleeding heart of this family. Amid the escalating arguments, Mr. Hargrove raises his hand, his authoritative demeanor silencing the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I must insist we maintain some decorum. This is a sensitive matter, and it was your father's explicit wish that his decisions be respected. Victoria rounds on him. Then perhaps you'd like to explain why my father, one of the most private men I've ever known, would leave nearly half of his fortune to someone none of us has ever heard of? Mr. Hargrove exhales deeply, his expression softening ever so slightly. I was instructed by Mr. Marshall to reveal a piece of information only if this particular clause caused discord. Given the current circumstances, I believe it is appropriate to share it now. The room falls silent, the weight of his words pulling everyone to the edge of their seats. Mr. Hargrove reaches into the stack of documents and retrieves a sealed envelope. He breaks the seal with deliberate care, extracting a handwritten letter. Clearing his throat, he begins to read. To my children, if you are hearing this, it means my decision to include Clara Harper in my will has sparked questions. Allow me to clarify. Clara is not a stranger, nor is she an outsider. She is in fact my daughter, a part of our family. Before you leap to judgment, know this. Clara's mother, Eleanor Harper, was a woman I loved deeply in my youth. Our paths diverged due to circumstances beyond our control, but not before. Eleanor discovered she was carrying my child. I only learned of Clara's existence many years later, but by then, Eleanor had passed and Clara was grown. My attempts to connect with Clara were met with resistance, not out of animosity, but because she had built a life of her own, one far removed from the Marshall name. Despite this, I felt it my duty to ensure she was cared for and recognized as part of this family, even if only after my passing. I hope you will treat her with the kindness and understanding she deserves. Yours, Ed. The room erupts once more, but this time the reactions are tinged with disbelief rather than anger. A daughter? Victoria breathes, her voice barely above a whisper. He had a secret daughter? That's absurd. Robert snaps, his face red with fury. Why wouldn't he tell us about her before? Why wait until now? This has to be some kind of mistake. Or worse, a lie. Sophia, though visibly shaken, speaks up again. It doesn't sound like a lie, Robert. That letter was written in his own hand. You saw it as clearly as I did. Then why didn't he bring her into our lives sooner? Victoria demands, her frustration mounting. Why keep her hidden all these years? Maybe he didn't want to disrupt the status quo, Sophia suggests, though the uncertainty in her voice betrays her own questions. Robert scoffs. Or maybe he knew she'd be a liability, a con artist just waiting to pounce. Well, I'm not buying it. Determined to prove his theory, Robert declares his intention to uncover the truth about Clara Harper. I'm not sitting around while some stranger waltzes in and takes what's rightfully ours, he says, his voice brimming with resolve. I'll find out everything there is to know about this Clara Harper, who she is, where she came from, and what her motives are. You mean you're going to dig up dirt on her? Sophia retorts, her tone sharp. Why not give her the benefit of the doubt? Because this isn't about doubt, Robert snaps. It's about protecting what's ours. You may be okay with handing over our inheritance, but I'm not. Victoria, who has been silently processing the revelation, finally speaks. For once, I agree with Robert. We need answers. If Clara truly is who Father claims, then so be it. But if she's not, she lets the implication hang in the air. Sophia shakes her head, disappointment flashing in her eyes. You're both so quick to assume the worst. Maybe instead of trying to discredit her, we should focus on understanding her story. The siblings' differing approaches set the stage for an inevitable clash. While Robert hires a private investigator to dig into Clara's past, Victoria begins compiling legal strategies to challenge the will, should it come to that. Sophia, however, takes a different path. Quietly, she resolves to meet Clara herself, to hear her side of the story and gauge whether their father's words were sincere. The narrative shifts once more to Clara, still unaware of the storm brewing around her. She is seen in her small classroom, teaching a group of eager children. The warmth and compassion she exudes stand in stark contrast to the bitterness consuming the Marshall family. Later, Clara receives an unexpected visitor, a courier delivering a letter from Mr. Hargrove. As she reads the contents, her face registers a mix of shock and disbelief. The letter informs her of her inheritance and her connection to Edward Marshall, a man she barely knew. The scene ends with Clara sitting alone at her kitchen table, the weight of the revelation settling over her. Her life, once simple and predictable, has suddenly been upended. Back at the Marshall estate, the tension continues to build. Robert uncovers fragments of Clara's past, her modest upbringing, her career as a teacher, and her reputation as a kind and hardworking individual. But he also finds something else, a gap in her history that raises more questions than answers. Victoria, meanwhile, grows increasingly frustrated with the lack of concrete evidence to discredit Clara. Her determination to challenge the will only hardens, driven as much by pride as by greed. Sophia, true to her word, begins her own quiet investigation, driven not by suspicion but by curiosity. She seeks out anyone who might have known Edward and Clara, piecing together a story that grows more complex with each revelation. As the second segment concludes, the camera lingers on the Marshall family portrait once again. This time, the shadows seem deeper, the expressions more inscrutable, as though the family secrets are watching, waiting to be uncovered. The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with a sense of mounting intrigue. Who is Clara Harper, really? And how will the Marshall family's quest for the truth reshape their lives and their legacy? The scene shifts dramatically, leaving behind the tension-fueled drama of the Marshall estate. The audience is introduced to a tranquil, small-town setting, a world apart from the grandeur and chaos of Edward Marshall's legacy. Clara Harper is at the center of it all, living a life defined by simplicity and purpose. Clara is first seen in her classroom, sunlight streaming through large windows as a group of wide-eyed children hang on her every word. The walls are adorned with colorful drawings and inspirational quotes, reflecting Clara's nurturing personality. "All right, class, that's it for today," Clara announces with a warm smile. The children groan in playful protest, clearly enjoying her lessons. As they gather their belongings, a young girl lingers. At her desk, clutching a crumpled piece of paper, Clara kneels to meet her at eye level. "What's this, Lily?" she asks gently. The girl hesitates before handing over the paper. "It's for you, Miss Harper. I drew it last night." Unfolding the sheet, Clara finds a heartfelt drawing of herself, surrounded by smiling children. Her eyes mist over as she hugs the girl. "Thank you, Lily. This is beautiful." The moment encapsulates Clara's essence, a compassionate, selfless woman who has dedicated her life to others. Later that evening, Clara is at home, her modest kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of a simmering stew. The sound of children playing drifts in through an open window. Her life, though simple, is one of quiet contentment. A knock at the door interrupts her routine. Wiping her hands on a dish towel, she opens the door to find a courier standing there with an envelope. "Miss Clara Harper?" he asks. "Yes, that's me," she replies, puzzled. "This is for you," he says, handing her the envelope before tipping his hat and departing. Clara stares at the envelope, her brow furrowed. The return address bears the name of Edward, Marshall's lawyer, a name unfamiliar to her. She opens it cautiously and begins to read. As the contents of the letter sink in, her expression shifts from confusion to shock. The lawyer's words are clear. She is the daughter of Edward Marshall, a man she has never known, and she has inherited a significant portion of his estate. The room seems to close in around her. The quiet life she has built for herself suddenly feels fragile, on the brink of upheaval. Clara sits at her kitchen table, the letter spread out before her like a puzzle she can't solve. Her mind races, grappling with the implications. Memories of her mother surface, brief flashes of a woman who worked tirelessly to provide for her, who rarely spoke of the past, but occasionally mentioned a man she once loved. Her mother's voice echoes in her mind. "Some doors are better left closed, Clara. Life is about moving forward." Clara picks up her phone and dials the number of her closest friend, Emily. "Hey, Clara, what's up?" Emily answers cheerfully. "I need to talk to you," Clara says, her voice trembling. "Can you come over?" "Of course. I'll be there at 15. Emily arrives to find Clara pacing her small living room, the letter clutched in her hand. "Okay, what's going on?" Emily asks, her tone a mix of concern and curiosity. Clara hands her the letter without a word. Emily reads it, her eyes widening with each line. "Clara, this is unbelievable," Emily says, looking up at her friend. "You're the daughter of a millionaire." "That's what they're saying," Clara replies, sinking onto the couch. "But it doesn't make any sense. I've never even met this man." Emily sits beside her, the letter still in hand. "What do you know about him?" "Nothing," Clara admits. "My mom mentioned someone once, a man she loved before I was born, but she never said his name, and she definitely never told me he was wealthy." Emily's brow furrows. "Do you think it's possible she kept this from you for a reason? Maybe she didn't want you to know." Clara shrugs helplessly. "I don't know. My mom was so private about her past. I always assumed it was too painful for her to talk about." Emily places a reassuring hand on Clara's shoulder. "This doesn't change who you are, Clara. You're still the same person you've always been. But maybe this is an opportunity to learn more about where you came from." Clara looks at her friend, uncertainty written all over her face. What if this is some kind of mistake? Or worse, what if it's not? What if I'm walking into something I'm not ready for? Emily smiles gently. "You've always been stronger than you think, Clara. Whatever this is, you'll handle it, and I'll be right here if you need me." Over the next few days, Clara finds herself torn between her instinct to maintain her simple life and the growing need to uncover the truth about her connection to Edward Marshall. She spends hours researching his name online, uncovering details about his vast empire and his complicated family dynamics. Every article she reads only deepens her sense of unease. Edward Marshall was a man of immense power and influence, but his legacy seems mired in secrecy and scandal. Clara's mind returns to her mother's cryptic words. Some doors are better left closed, but curiosity proves too strong to resist. Clara decides to contact Mr. Hargrove, the lawyer, to arrange a meeting. In a quiet moment, Clara pulls out an old photo album, flipping through faded pictures of her childhood. Her mother appears in nearly every photo, smiling despite the hardships she must have faced. One photo in particular catches Clara's attention, a black and white snapshot of her mother as a young woman, standing beside a man whose face has been torn from the picture. Clara traces her fingers over the torn edge, 1,000 questions swirling in her mind. Was this Edward Marshall? Why had her mother kept this photo? The answers feel just out of reach, like fragments of a dream she can't quite piece together. As the segment draws to a close, Clara picks up her phone and dials Mr. Hargrove's number. Her voice is steady, but the tension is palpable. "Mr. Hargrove, this is Clara Harper," she says. "I'd like to discuss the letter you sent me." The camera lingers on Clara's face as she speaks, her expression a mixture of resolve and vulnerability. The audience is left with a sense of anticipation. Clara's journey is just beginning, and the secrets of her past are waiting to be uncovered. The screen fades to black, marking the end of the segment and leaving viewers eager to see how Clara's story will unfold. As Clara's modest life is juxtaposed against the opulence and turmoil of the Marshall family, the stage is set for a deep dive into the intertwined pasts of Edward Marshall, Margaret Harper, and the long-buried secrets that connect them. The screen fades into a golden-hued flashback, the scene marked by the unmistakable charm of the 1980s. Edward Marshall is a younger man, his demeanor softer, his ambition still, tempered by the innocence of youth. He stands in the sunlit garden of a modest home, his gaze locked on Margaret Harper. Margaret is vibrant, her laughter a melody that seems to draw Edward in like a moth to a flame. She is nothing like the women of Edward's privileged world, grounded, kind, and unafraid to challenge him. "You don't belong here, you know," Margaret teases, a playful smirk on her lips. "And where do I belong?" Edward counters, his voice light, but carrying an undertone of yearning. Margaret shakes her head, her expression softening. "You belong where the world can't touch you. But that's not here, is it?" The flashback reveals their love, fierce and all-consuming, but doomed by the weight of Edward's family expectations. His parents, steely and unyielding, are shown in brief, cold exchanges with their son. "This woman will ruin you, Edward," his father says. "Your legacy is not something you can throw away on a whim." Torn between love and obligation, Edward chooses his family, leaving Margaret behind. The decision haunts him, a shadow that grows darker as the years pass. The narrative shifts back to the present, where Clara, now armed with a letter and a mix of apprehension and determination, meets Edward's children at the Marshall estate. The scene is tense, the air thick with suspicion. Edward's eldest son, Robert, is the first to speak. His tone is sharp, laced with accusation. "So, you're the long-lost daughter," he says, his eyes narrowing. "How convenient." Clara remains composed, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I'm not here to take anything from you," she says firmly. "I just want answers." Robert scoffs. "Answers? Or a piece of the inheritance?" His sister, Evelyn, interjects, her voice softer but no less cutting. "You have to admit, it's a bit strange. All these years, and now you show up? How do we even know you're who you say you are?" Clara's resolve doesn't falter. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't even know Edward Marshall was my father until a few days ago. If you think I'm lying, you're welcome to prove it. But I'm not going anywhere until I know the truth." The confrontation escalates, voices overlapping in a chaotic mix of accusations and defenses. Clara, though outnumbered, refuses to be intimidated. The tension is interrupted by Mr. Hargrove, the family lawyer, who steps into the room with a leather-bound journal in hand. "This might provide some clarity," he says, placing the journal on the table. It's Edward's personal journal. He wanted Clara to have it. The room falls silent, the weight of the journal's significance sinking in. Clara hesitates before picking it up, her fingers tracing the worn edges of the leather. She opens it, her eyes scanning the first few pages. Edward's handwriting is neat but heavy, as if every word carried the weight of his emotions. The screen transitions into Edward's written words, brought to life through a voiceover. "To my daughter, Clara, whom I've never had the privilege of knowing." The camera shifts between Clara's face as she reads and scenes from Edward's later years, where his regret is palpable. "I was a coward. I let my family dictate my choices, and in doing so, I lost the greatest love I've ever known. Margaret was everything I wasn't: brave, kind, unshakable. When she told me she was expecting, I should have fought for her, for you. But I didn't. I convinced myself it was for the best, but that was a lie I told myself to ease my guilt." The flashback scenes grow darker, showing Edward alone in his grand office, staring at a photograph of Margaret and a baby Clara he was too ashamed to meet. The journal also reveals Edward's attempts to find Clara later in life. Letters he wrote but never sent, private investigators he hired but dismissed out of fear, and his ultimate decision to leave part of his fortune to her as an acknowledgement of his failure. "If you're reading this, Clara, know that I loved you from afar. I was too weak to be the father you deserved, but I hope this will bring you some measure of closure." Clara's hands tremble as she closes the journal, tears streaming down her face. The Marshall siblings, witnessing her reaction, exchange uneasy glances. For the first time, Evelyn speaks without malice. "I didn't know," she says quietly. "I didn't know. You felt that way?" Robert remains stoic, his jaw tight. "It doesn't change anything," he mutters, but his voice lacks the conviction it held earlier. The segment ends with Clara standing outside the Marshall estate, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. She looks out at the sprawling grounds, a world so different from her own, and takes a deep breath. "This isn't just about me," she says to herself. "It's about him, and it's about the truth." The camera pans out, capturing the enormity of the estate and the enormity of the journey Clara is about to embark on. The screen fades to black, leaving viewers eager to see how the search for truth will shape Clara's path and the Marshall family's future. The journey of Clara and the Marshall family takes a poignant turn as emotions simmer and truths are laid bare. The tension of mistrust begins to give way to reluctant acceptance, opening the door to healing and reflection. The segment begins with a quiet scene in the sprawling dining hall of the Marshall estate. Clara, now a tentative guest in the home of her late father, sits at the long table with Robert, Evelyn, and their younger brother, Michael. The stark contrast between her modest demeanor and their polished, privileged lives is striking. "So, you're a schoolteacher," Evelyn says, her tone no longer cutting but edged with curiosity. "Yes," Clara replies, her voice steady. "I teach second grade in a small town. It's not much, but it's fulfilling." Michael, the youngest sibling, who has remained mostly silent until now, leans forward. "What made you decide to become a teacher?" Clara smiles faintly, her gaze distant. "My mother. She worked hard to give me a good life. She used to say that education was the one thing no one could take away from you. I wanted to pass that on to others." The siblings exchange glances, their preconceived notions of Clara beginning to waver. Her words carry a depth and humility unfamiliar in their world of luxury and entitlement. Over the course of the evening, Clara shares glimpses of her upbringing: birthday parties with homemade cakes, weekends spent at the library, and the small but meaningful traditions she and her mother cherished. Her stories are simple but evocative, painting a picture of a life rich in values and resilience, even without wealth. Evelyn, visibly moved, finally says, "You're nothing like I expected." Clara looks at her, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. "And what did you expect?" Evelyn hesitates before responding. "Someone calculating. Someone who would want to take everything from us." Clara shakes her head, her voice firm. "I'm not here to take anything. I only want to understand who my father was and why he never reached out." The following day, Robert sits in his father's study, sifting through files and papers in search of clarity. Despite his lingering resentment, a part of him feels compelled to seek the truth. Among the papers, he finds a sealed envelope marked with his father's handwriting. For Robert. He hesitates before opening it, the weight of his father's words already heavy in his mind. Inside is a DNA test confirming Clara's legitimacy. The truth stares back at him, irrefutable and absolute. Robert leans back in the chair, the paper trembling in his hand. Memories of his father flood his mind, the man he idolized but often found distant and enigmatic. Later that evening, he gathers his siblings and Clara in the living room. The atmosphere is charged with anticipation as he places the DNA results on the table. "It's true," Robert says, his voice devoid of its usual edge. "You are Edward's daughter." Clara's breath catches, a mix of relief and sadness washing over her. For Evelyn and Michael, the confirmation is a revelation, dismantling the last vestiges of doubt. Evelyn reaches for Clara's hand, her touch tentative but sincere. "I'm sorry," she says softly, "for doubting you, for everything." Michael nods in agreement, adding, "This isn't your fault. None of it is." Robert, though less forthcoming, looks Clara in the eye and says, "It doesn't change how I feel about losing our father, but it's clear he cared about you in his own way." The next scene takes place at Edward's grave, a somber and reflective setting. Clara stands alone, the journal clutched to her chest. The sunlight filters through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the marble headstone. She kneels, placing a hand on the cold stone. Her voice is steady but tinged with emotion. "I don't know if you can hear me," she begins, "but I hope you can. I spent my whole life wondering who my father was. I imagined you as a hero, someone who could do no wrong. And then I learned the truth, that you left, that you didn't fight for us." Her voice wavers, but she presses on. "For a long time, I was angry. I told myself I didn't need you. But now, I see that you were human, that you made mistakes, and I see that you tried, even if it was too late." Clara's tears fall freely now, but her expression remains resolute. "Thank you for this," she says, holding up the journal. For your words, for your acknowledgement. It doesn't erase the pain, but it means something. It means I matter to you. Unbeknownst to Clara, Robert, Evelyn, and Michael are watching from a distance. The sight of Clara's raw vulnerability stirs something in each of them, a shared sense of loss that transcends their differences. Evelyn breaks the silence. She's not the enemy, she says softly. She's family. Robert nods, his expression thoughtful. Maybe it's time we started acting like it. The segment closes with Clara and the Marshall siblings gathered in the garden of the estate. The mood is lighter, the tension replaced with a tentative camaraderie. They share stories about Edward, laughing and reminiscing about the man they each knew in different ways. For the first time, Clara feels a sense of belonging, not just as Edward's daughter, but as someone who has earned her place in the family. As the camera pans out, capturing the serene beauty of the garden, Clara's voiceover reflects her journey. I came here looking for answers. What I found was more than I could have imagined. A family, a history, and a father who, despite his flaws, loved me in his own way. This isn't the end, it's the beginning. The screen fades to black, leaving viewers with a sense of closure and hope, eager to see what lies ahead for Clara and the Marshall family. The Marshall family's saga culminates in a heartfelt conclusion, as lingering tensions ease and new paths are forged. While not all wounds heal completely, glimmers of reconciliation and hope emerge. The scene opens in the grand living room of the Marshall estate, where the lawyer has assembled Clara and Edward's children to discuss the final resolution of the inheritance. A large wooden desk dominates the room, stacked with legal documents and bound files that seem to symbolize the weight of Edward's legacy. Clara sits quietly, her calm demeanor in stark contrast to the hesitant expressions of her half-siblings. The atmosphere is charged, but there is less hostility now, replaced by an air of tentative acceptance. Miss Harper, the lawyer begins, as per Edward's will, you are entitled to a substantial portion of his estate. However, you are not obligated to accept it in full if you have other plans. Clara looks around the room, her gaze lingering on Robert, Evelyn, and Michael. She takes a deep breath before speaking. I've thought a lot about this, she says, her voice steady but warm. This inheritance is a gift. A way for me to honor my father's memory and the values he wanted to instill in me. But I don't need all of it. I've lived a modest life, and I'm happy with that. Evelyn leans forward, intrigued. What are you planning to do? Clara smiles. I want to set up a foundation in his name, something that gives back to the world. He cared about education, community programs, maybe even opportunities for underprivileged children. I think that's what he would have wanted. The room falls silent as her words sink in. Even Robert, who has been the most resistant to Clara's presence, looks thoughtful. That's admirable, he says finally, his tone grudging but sincere. Clara nods, her expression resolute. This inheritance isn't about me. It's about doing something meaningful with what he left behind. The lawyer clears his throat, his professional demeanor softening. That's a noble decision, Miss Harper. We'll ensure the foundation is established according to your wishes. Later that evening, Clara finds herself in the study, flipping through Edward's journal. The room is quiet, the dim light casting a warm glow on the shelves lined with leather-bound books. The journal's pages are filled with Edward's musings, regrets, dreams, and reflections on the life he wished he had lived. A knock at the door breaks the silence. It's Robert, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Do you have a minute? He asks. Clara nods, gesturing for him to sit. He hesitates before taking the chair opposite her. I wanted to say, I've been wrong about you, he begins, his tone measured. I let my anger get in the way of seeing who you really are. And I think my father saw something in you that he wanted us to learn. Clara listens intently, her expression softening. I can't pretend this hasn't been difficult for all of us, she says gently. But I hope we can move forward, even if it takes time. Robert nods, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I think we can. For what it's worth, I respect what you're doing with the inheritance. It shows character. Clara smiles in return, the tension between them easing. Thank you. That means a lot. As Robert leaves the room, Clara feels a sense of closure, knowing that while their relationship may never be perfect, it has the potential to grow into something meaningful. The final scene shifts to Clara's small town, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the Marshall estate. She stands outside the modest school where she teaches, the crisp morning air carrying the sound of children's laughter. Clara's house is cozy and unassuming, with flower boxes on the windowsills and a wooden bench on the porch. Inside, she unpacks a small box of items from her time at the Marshall estate, a framed photo of Edward and his children, a letter from Evelyn wishing her well, and the journal that has become her most treasured possession. She sets the journal on the coffee table and picks up another item from the box, an old photograph of her mother, Margaret, and a young Edward, smiling under the sun. It's a snapshot of a love that, though fleeting, shaped her existence. Clara sits on the porch, the photograph in her hand, gazing out at the quiet street. Her close friend, Rachel, walks up the path, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Settling back in, Rachel asks, handing Clara a cup. Clara nods, a serene smile on her face. It feels good to be home, but it also feels different, like I found a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. Rachel glances at the photograph and then at Clara. Do you feel at peace now? Clara takes a moment before responding. I do. For so long, I wondered who my father was and why he wasn't there. Now I know. And even though it's bittersweet, I'm grateful for the chance to understand him and to carry his memory forward in a way that matters. The camera lingers on Clara's face as she looks up at the sky, her expression a mix of contentment and hope. The screen fades to a montage of Clara's new foundation taking shape, children smiling as they receive scholarships, community centers being renovated, and programs designed to uplift those in need. The name of the foundation, the Edward Marshall Legacy Fund, appears on a banner during an opening ceremony, with Clara standing proudly among the crowd. The final shot returns to Clara's porch, where she writes in her own journal, the framed photograph of her parents beside her. Her voiceover carries the audience into the conclusion. Life is full of unexpected turns. Sometimes it's the things we never asked for that shape us the most. I came searching for a father and found a family, a purpose, and a way to honor the past, while building a future. For that, I will always be grateful. As the screen fades to black, the soft notes of a hopeful melody play, leaving viewers with a sense of closure and inspiration. Clara's journey has come full circle, a testament to resilience, forgiveness, and the enduring power of love.